So wonderful to have everyone with us on this fine Rosh Chodesh, Hanukkah, Tuesday night. This will be the final class for this semester. We'll take a little break for the next a couple weeks, and we'll pick up again in January. I'll send out an email with all of the specifics, but it's been wonderful to have the opportunity to do some learning with you over the course of these past weeks. And I'm excited about the chance to do some learning with you tonight. A little bit of a different format this evening, and let me encourage you to please participate. You should be able to unmute yourself. Let me just make sure that that is the case. I believe everyone can unmute. If that's not possible, let me know, and we'll try to make the necessary adjustments. Tonight, what I want to do is study with you the Halachos of Hanukkah in the Rambam. It sounds very ambitious, but in point of fact, the Rambam only has 2 chapters in all of his Mishnah Torah that are devoted to the Halachos of Hanukkah, and almost 1/2 of one of those chapters, as we'll see, devoted to a topic which is only tangentially related to the topic of Hanukkah. So ambitious as it might seem, learning all of the halachos in the Rambam is actually doable. We're not going to learn all of them, but my goal tonight is to give you a sense and a flavor for what it is that the Rambam was trying to communicate in the 2 chapters that he wrote on Hilchos Hanukkah in the Mishnah Torah. The argument that I want to make is largely based on teachings of Rav Soloveitchik and Rav Michal Rosenzweig. There's a couple pieces that are my own, and they're entirely speculative, and you'll see that their quality is substantially lower and different than the rest of the material that I want to present. So the sources that you have on your sheet are really just the primary sources. It's the Rambam and a couple of Gemaras. So let me just say one more word of introduction, which is why make this the centerpiece of any shiur, of any particular topic of interest. Why the Rambam? As opposed to anyone else. So on some level, the answer to that question requires no justification. The Rambam is the Rambam, and he was the greatest of his generation. He may be the greatest ever from a certain perspective. But more to the point, the Rambam, really more than anyone, was a great synthesizer. And we'll talk a little later. I hope we'll have a chance to talk about what the Rambam was culling from. But in principle, the Rambam had at his disposal all of the written Torah and all of the oral Torah that had been transmitted until his generation, which includes all the Talmud Bavli, all the Talmud Yerushalmi, everything that's not included in the Talmud, so the Tosefta and the Midrashim, etc. And with all of those sources at his disposal, he was really the first and maybe still the best synthesizer and codifier of those sources. So as opposed to someone who's just recording a halacha here and there, the Rambam is telling you, based on the totality of Jewish knowledge and Jewish history, here is based on what I've distilled from the sources, the principal takeaways and the principal halachos. And that's always true for the study of the Rambam, and that's one of the reasons why in our Masorah, as students of Rav Soloveitchik, in the Brisker Derech, the Rambam is always so central. Okay? So what I want to do is take you through 5 or 6 halachos in the Rambam, and I would just want to make trouble. Okay? I just want to identify some of the problems, challenges, questions that emerge just trying to read the basic halacha in the Rambam. Okay? And it's not a trick and it's not a game. the Rambam was intended for the widest possible audience. The idea was there was a very low bar for entry, and that anyone should be able to pick up the Rambam and understand exactly what the Rambam is saying. So if there's a problem in the Rambam, it requires solving, and it requires solving in what shouldn't be a complicated way. It's not meant to be a complicated text. The Rambam wrote other texts which are complicated. This was meant to be straightforward. So when something is less than straightforward, it has to grab our attention. So I'm going to put the source sheet in the chat once again, and you should have it in the email. It was available on the webpage. So I'm not going to put it up on the screen, but I hope that you'll follow in the sources. I want to begin with the Rambam in Halachos Hanukkah. This is Perek Gimel. As you know, the Rambam, as he often did, combined sections. So in this section of the Mishnah Torah, he has Halachos Megillah v'Hanukkah. First two chapters are about Purim. Second two chapters are about Hanukkah. Okay, so the Halachos of Hanukkah appear as Perek Gimel and Perek Dal. Okay, so this is the beginning of the Rambam's discussion on the. B'bayis sheni kishemalchu Yavan gazru gezeros al Yisrael bitlu datam. Just a word of note. Rav Soloveitchik writes about this extensively. We always refer to the enemies of the Jewish people in the Hanukkah story as Yavan. It's not true, meaning they're not the Greeks, they're the Hellenized Assyrians. Why do we refer to them as Yavan? So Soloveitchik, writes often that they weren't the direct cause of the trouble, but they kind of gave birth to the generation that persecuted the Jewish people. They invented the notion of persecution. Right? There'd been enemies of the Jewish people before, but there was no one who had come along and said, "We want to acculturate you, we want to assimilate you." That was something that the Greeks had really given to the world, and so their followers, the Hellenized Greeks, we refer to still as Yavan. Okay, so the Hellenized Syrians, I should say. So in the time of the Second Temple, when these Hellenized Syrians were running the show, they made Gezeros decrees against the Jewish people, and they tried to abolish the Jewish religion. And they did not permit the Jews to be involved in Torah mitzvos. That's a very important word, not just that they prevented the study of Torah, but they prevented the involvement in Torah, which is the same word we use when we say a bracha on the Torah. It's not just about learning, but it's involvement, which is something much broader. And they made an assault on our economics, and they made an assault on our families, our daughters. And they broke into the temple and caused all kinds of desecration. The Jewish people suffered immensely at their hands. There was terrible distress and pressure until God took compassion on our grandparents and he saved them. And the Hasmonean priests ruled. Okay, so they defeated the enemies of the Jewish people, and they saved the Jewish people from their hands. They appointed a king, which is problematic. And the Jewish sovereignty returned for more than 200 years until the destruction of the second temple. Okay, let's read one more halacha and then we'll pause. When the Jewish people overcame their enemies, it was the 25th day of Kislev. And they entered the Heichal, and they only found one cruse of oil. It was only sufficient for one day. But they managed to light it for 8 days until they produced new oil. Now, part of the challenge of reading this is that the story is so familiar to us, right? We hear these words and we say, like Rabbi Levine, you don't have to, we got it, right? You don't have to start with this. We know it. It's so obvious. So part of the problem is it's only so obvious because the Rambam said it. And the Rambam became part of the canon, and now we all know the Rambam. The problem is, how did the Rambam know it? Okay. So there's two pieces that I want to raise about these first two halachos. First is a categorical challenge, which is the Rambam is writing this in the Mishnah Torah. The Mishnah Torah is a work of halacha exclusively. So if you open up, and I'm sorry I didn't put it on the sheet, but just in the interest of time, you open up the beginning of Hilchos Megillah Hanukkah. So you don't find the Purim story summarized at the beginning of the halachos of Purim. That's not there. You open up the halachos of Chametz Umatzah and you start learning about Hilchos Pesach. So it doesn't start with the Jewish people were enslaved by the Egyptians for hundreds of years and they cried out and God saved us. No, this is the mitzvah of Korban Pesach. This is the mitzvah of Chametz. This is the mitzvah of Matzah. This is the mitzvah of Maror. Here's how to have the Seder. There's no history lesson here, right? So right away, if you read the Rambam from beginning to end, you have to recognize right away that categorically this is highly unusual. Why would the Rambam start Hilchos Hanukkah with the story of the salvation of the Jewish people, right? That's not what he does. That's one point. The second point, and this will flesh out in a couple minutes when we go back to the Gemara, but as I mentioned a moment ago, right, the Rambam has at his disposal the Jewish Canon. So the Jewish Canon is all of Tanakh and all of Torah Shebaal Peh. The problem is that many of the details that the Rambam mentions here are not found in the Gemara. Not in the Gemara, in the Talmud Bavli, and not in the Talmud Yerushalmi. Some of the sources that the Rambam, some of the details that the Rambam has here, we don't really have any classical source for. So immediately that has to grab our attention too, not just why is the Rambam telling us the story, but why is he telling us the story and including information that, again, has no source in the Talmud or the Medrash. So we'll call that question number one. What is the Rambam doing with the story at the beginning of these halachos? Let's continue. Halacha Gimel, and feel free to interrupt with questions or comments at any time. ובבני זה התקינו חכמים שבאוסו דור שיהיו 18 הימים האלו שתחילתם מליל 25 בכסלו, ימי שמחה והלל. So as a result of what I just told you, the Rambam says in the first two halachos, the sages of that generation decided that these 8 days, beginning with the 25th, would be days of simcha and hallel. Okay, just flag those words in your mind. We have to come back and see what that's about. So we light candles at the entrance to our homes. Right? Each night we light candles. These 8 days are called Chanukah. And these days, like Purim, one is not allowed to deliver a eulogy, one is not allowed to fast. And lighting candles is considered a mitzvah midivrei sofrim. That's an important category that the Rambam has. They're rabbinic in nature, but there's something more than just rabbinic in nature. Now, let's continue for just a moment. Okay. Anyone who's obligated in Megillah is obligated in Ner Chanukah, right? Which means basically all men and all women. Now, this seems so obvious that it almost doesn't require, mentioning. Any school child who attends Jewish, like they know this, right? So when you light the brachos, when you light the candles, 3 brachos. But I just want to see this with you in the text of the Rambam because I want to raise an important question. What are the 3 brachos? He spells it out. Number 1. Number 2. And the third one, just for the first night, is that the bracha of Shechian. Interesting. The Rambam continues, if you're not lighting and you're just spectating, the postscript say, like, how is this even possible? Maybe somebody's on a boat and they can't light, but they see somebody else. Unusual circumstance, but not really practical for our purposes, but conceptually very important. If someone just sees the candles but doesn't have the opportunity to light, he says 2 brachos on the first night. All other nights, right, and a regular person who's lighting would say 2 brachos. Someone who can only see the candles but can't light would say only one bracha. So here's my question to you. Ready? Take for granted. You say the first bracha, you say the second bracha, you say the third bracha, you light your candles. But put aside the Shechianu, just for the sake of simplicity. It's night number 2. Okay? And you say, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher gesham mitzvanu l'hadlik ner shel Hanukkah. What kind of bracha is that? Multiple choice question. Okay, so I've played at least 2 kahoots this Hanukkah with family Zooms. I hope everyone has had an opportunity to at least do some family Zooms. So here's my kahoot for you. You ready? Multiple choice. Bracha asher gesham mitzvanu l'hadlik ner shel Hanukkah is A, a birkas shevach vehuda, B, a birkas hananin, or C, a birkas hamitzvah. Is it A, a bracha of praise to Hashem, B, a bracha that you make when you derive benefit from this world, or C, a bracha that you make upon the performance of a mitzvah? What do you say? Survey says, not a trick question.
C.
Thank you. C, right? Hands down, it's unassailable. There's nothing else to say. Beginning and end of the conversation, it's birkas mitzvah. We know all mitzvos, the Gemara says explicitly, codified by every posek for all time immemorial. Mitzvahs have to be performed over la'asiyasan. Before you do the mitzvah, you make the bracha. There are a couple of special exceptions, but by and large, right before you pick up a lulav, you say Baruch Hashem. Right? What's the bracha on a lulav? Thank you. Al
Netilas Lulav.
Al Netilas Lulav. Thank you. What's the bracha on a shofar? Right? Lishmoa kol shofar. You blow the shofar. So very nice. It's you make the bracha and you do the mitzvah. So the second bracha, right? Same choices, A, B, or C. Is the bracha sh'asa nisim laboseinu a birkas shavach vehuda, birkas hananin, or birkas hamitzvah? You say?
Is it Shavach Vehuda?
Shavach vehuda has to be. Birkas hananin is when you make
all 3.
Right, to eat an apple. Birkas hamitzvah is right. You're doing the performance. You see a rainbow, you say a special bracha, you hear lightning, you hear thunder, you see lightning. Special bracha, thank Hashem for, not to thank Hashem, but to praise Hashem for this special phenomenon. Sha'asa nisim lavuseinu, praise Hashem for the miracles that he did, right, in that generation, in our generation. So that's a hefsek. Why are you allowed to make right after you said the bracha of Birkas HaMitzvah? You got to make the bracha and light the candles. Right? Some people start singing, right? Haneros Halalu. So maybe some people start singing after the light. The first one said, okay, so that's very nice. So maybe Haneros Halalu is not a hefsek anymore. But that second bracha or the Shechianu also, it's a hefsek. You're not allowed to have any interruption between the mitzvah and between the bracha and the performance of the mitzvah. How do you get away with those other brachos? What are they doing there? Okay. Question, say that's question number 2. Question number 3, the Birkas Haroeh, right? This is an old question and there's many answers, but I have to at least raise it. So, you don't have any matzah. It's Seder night and you're not eating matzah, but you happen to see me eating matzah. So you can't say Baruch atah Hashem mitzvanu, right? Lechol, alachilas matzah. You can't say it because you're not eating matzah. But you see Levine eating matzah. You see pointing to that was a special bracha on the seeing of another Jew eating matzah, doing it's unheard of. If you're doing the thing, you could say the bracha on the thing. You're watching somebody else do the thing. well, you're either part of it or you're not part of it, right? The Rambam is not discussing like some person who's standing in my living room and, they're like a partner with me and they're a guest in my home. He's talking about a guy on the street who has no idea whose candles he's looking at, and he's walking by and he sees Hanukkah candles. He could stop in his tracks and say, Baruch atah Hashem Eloheinu melech haolam sha'asi nisim l'avoseinu b'yamim ha'azman.
But isn't that the case for every bracha shevach voda? You see a rainbow. You didn't make the rainbow.
Yeah, except everything, right? Normally what you're saying is you see some kind of natural phenomenon created by God. Here, I'm the one lighting the candles. I'm not special. I make a rainbow. I just lit a candle.
Well, no, but what's the dichotomy? It's shevach voda. Doesn't matter who makes it or who does it. You don't have to do it yourself. It's shevach voda and something you see.
Okay, so that's a fair point. So then I'll throw it back at you and say, why this mitzvah and not any other? Picking up a lulav.
Because I hate to sound brisk, because it's not, because lulav depends on being notel lulav, not seeing somebody be notel lulav. Eating matzah depends on eating the matzah, not seeing the matzah. The essence of the mitzvah has to do with actually doing something physical with the object.
Okay, so if I were blind, I would say the bracha of hadlakas neiros. So I can't, right? I'm saying.
The blind thing's a curveball.
Okay, but I'm saying it's why of all the mitzvahs in the Torah can say a bracha on somebody else's mitzvah that they had nothing to do with. Okay, two more questions that I want to share with you, and then I want to go backwards.
Rabbi?
We can tie things together.
Rabbi?
Yes, Panina.
Is Sha'as HaNisim about the pirsume of the nes? So if if a blind person is lighting, they're still publicizing the viewing of the candles for others, maybe.
Yes, no, that's true, and the idea of it is to publicize the nes, and I do want to come back to that. So hold on to that.
On Rosh Hashanah, if you have no intention of hearing shofar, but you walk by a shul and hear the shofar, you're yotze. So this is sort of the same thing.
So I would say that could even deepen the question, which is, let's just say, right, that the person who sees the candles is yotze. No one says that the guy is going to make a bracha on hearing the shofar, right? Unless he's, there's no other bracha than the person performing the mitzvah. The hearer doesn't say a bracha. So I'm not aware of any other, analog to this special halach. Okay, two more questions. Just look for a second at the rest of Perek Gimel. I just put it on here so you could see it. It's stunning. Okay. The rest of Perek Gimel, halacha hey vav zayin, all the way through the end of the chapter, which is 15 halachos. These halachos are the halachos of Hallel. Happens to be we say Hallel on Hanukkah, but of all the places in the Mishnah Torah that the Rambam could put Hilchos Hallel, he puts them in the middle of Hilchos Hanukkah. Not an accident. When the Rambam makes a decision like this, not an accident. He could have put them in a lot of other places. Hilchos Megillah Hanukkah is at the very end of Zmanim. So he already had Hilchos Yom Tov. He already had Hilchos Sukkah. There are lots of other days in the calendar, Hilchos Rosh Chodesh, right? Lots of other days in the calendar where we said Hallel, he could have put him in there. He could have put him in Hilchos Tefillah. What are Hilchos Hanukkah in their entirety? Right? He goes through the whole calendar. These are the 18 days of the calendar when we say, what are they all doing in the smack in the middle? Right? I didn't skip anything. We just learned the first 4 halachos. And now halacha 5 through 15, Hilchos Hallel. Yes, it's true. We say how, but why, of all places, is the Rambam putting Hilchos Hallel in the middle of Hilchos Hanukkah? Last question I want to share with you, and now I am going to skip, but jump to Hilchos Hanukkah Perek Daled, and to the end or near the end. Okay, so it's the last page of your source sheet, page 4. You know, when I made printouts back in the old days, I used to be very sensitive. I tried to, just pick a line here and a line there, and save the trees. You strip it all to one page so that you're making handouts, so you can make as few as possible. Now nobody's printing these things. I just put it all on 17-page handout. I don't mind. So, the last page of the source sheet. This is chapter 4, halacha 12. Perek Daled halacha yud beis. So the Rambam has gone through and he's told you how to perform the mitzvah of candle lighting and how many candles to light and who lights and when to light. Then, as he gets to the end, he's winding down and he says in halacha yud beis, mitzvah ner Hanukkah, mitzvah chaviva hi ad me'od. So this is another one of those, like, throw up your hands. It's bizarre. The mitzvah of Hanukkah candles, very, very special, very dear, very precious, very beloved mitzvah. The 613 mitzvahs, they're all beloved, they're all beautiful, they're all special, they're all precious. The Rambam himself writes that you can't know, right, what's a big mitzvah, what's a little mitzvah, what's an important mitzvah, how much is the schar for one mitzvah, how much is the onesh for not doing another mitzvah. You can't know, so you have to treat all mitzvahs equally, and all mitzvahs are important. Chaviva ad ma'od, special mitzvah. Mitzvahs ner Hanukkah, right? The Rambam doesn't say blowing a shofar is chaviva ad ma'od. Ner Hanukkah, chaviva ad ma'od, very special, very precious. And you know what? B'tzarech adam lihizaher ba. A person has to be very careful, very particular about the mitzvah of Neiros Hanukkah. Lulav, shofar, kriya shema, matzah, tzedakah, Shabbos, kibbutz avim. You don't find this language about any of them. Very careful, very special. Why? Kidei lahodia hanes, because you need to advertise, you need to make public the miracle. Hostif b'shevach hakel v'hodaya lo al hanisim she'asa. And you need to add shevach and hodaya on the miracles that happened. Afilu ein lo ma yochal ela min hatzdaka, shoel o mocher ksuso v'lokeach shemen v'neros umadlik. And now the application of everything he said up until this point in halacha yud beis comes to the fore. It's very special, it's very precious, you have to be very careful about it. And what's the consequence of it being so special and precious and you have to take it so seriously? You don't have any food to eat. You're on the dole, you have to go knocking on doors, you have to be supported by the communal tzedakah fund because you have nothing. So generally speaking, if a person doesn't have anything, well, that exempts them. We say onus rachmana patre. A person has to spend up to a chomesh, up to 20% on the performance of a positive mitzvah. So I'm trying to buy a lulav and esrog, but I'm flat broke. And the lulav costs $20 and the esrog costs another 20. I don't have $40. I only have $10. So that's it. The halacha says I don't have to start selling my clothing to get the balance. The Torah doesn't obligate such a person in the performance of such a mitzvah. At some point, we apply the principle, onus rachmana patre. If it's not possible, it's not possible, right? We have an ideal, and then reality hits, the ideal hits reality, and at some point we say, it's just not possible. This person is exempt from the mitzvah. So shofar, matzah, lulav, go up and down the list, right? Onus rachmana patre, that's what the Rambam would say. If you can't afford it, you can't do it. But when it comes to the halachos of Hanukkah, I just want to tell you, the Rambam says, afilu ein lo ma yochel ela min tzedakah. The guy has nothing, right? He's getting breakfast, lunch, and dinner from the local shelter because he can't afford to buy food. What does he have to do? It's the 25th of Kislev. It's time to light Hanukkah candles. So what's this man's obligation? Shoel o mochar kasuso. He has to ask for a hand-down so that he could go buy a box of candles, sell his shirt. That's the literal expression. O mochar kasuso, let him sell the shirt off his back. The lokech shemim v'neros, let him buy what he needs to light the Hanukkah candles and madlik. Saying, what's happening here? This is a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. It's beautiful. It's a wonderful holiday, and everyone loves Hanukkah. It's not. It's not a mitzvah saseh d'oraisa, right? It doesn't even rise to the level of any of the things I just mentioned. Kibbud av va'em, mezuzah, shofar, lulav. Right? It's not any of those. This is a second temple holiday, rabbinic in nature, and the Rambam elevates it to this status, which is just unparalleled. How do we explain any of this? Okay, so let me pause here and just ask if there are any questions or comments. I hope at least I've given you a flavor for some of what's unusual and provocative about Hilchos Hanukkah and the Rambam.
Couldn't he have said, as long as he can join somebody else who's lighting the candles, wouldn't he be observing the mitzvah?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's conspicuous that he doesn't suggest that first, because it's a perfectly viable and valid means by which to fulfill the mitzvah. And he had just talked about it, actually, meaning we didn't get into it, but if I'm staying at your house, right, I'm a house guest of yours. I don't have my own house this Hanukkah. I'm just staying with you. So it's your house. The mitzvah is Ner Yishabeh, so one menorah, one Chanukiah per household. So I could light my own, but what the halacha is, I give you a couple bucks to pay for my share, and we partner, and you do the mitzvah. So yes, that would have been a perfectly good solution. The Rambam doesn't propose it. Any other thoughts, questions, or comments?
This is the holiday that's not Derabana. This is the holiday it's not Deraisa. It's the holiday that's Derabana. So obviously he's trying to elevate it as if it's at least as important, or maybe even more important. That's it seems to me, and that's why he put Hallel there too. To say that Hallel, which is clearly Derabana, is up there with Hallel, all the other ones. So it's clearly what he's doing is elevating the Derabana. That seems to be his point.
So look, sometimes that certainly happens, right? It's compensatory, and the rabbis were always a little nervous that people would take rabbinic halachos and rabbinic holidays, whatever the case may be, less seriously because they're rabbinic. So they had to make them more important, more strict, whatever the formulation is. As he said, to elevate them in the eyes of the populace. So that could certainly be a piece of what's happening here.
Is the last halacha, is it anti-Karaite? Since the Rambam lived in the time of Karaim in Egypt, and he's trying to emphasize the importance of the Rabbanon and the Karaim. I don't know if the Karaim observed Hanukkah. No idea.
That's a great question. I don't know much about the Karaite observance of Hanukkah. It's an interesting thought that had not come to my mind. But yeah, there's always a possibility, right, in any of these kinds of texts that there's something polemical going on, because someone always has the opposition in the back of their head. So depending on where they're living, it might be anti-Islam, or it might be Karaite. Again, there might be something in there. Fascinating. I'd not thought of that.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I was wondering whether it's connected somehow, because we say Hanera Kodesh Haim, that this is connected to the Mishkan, to the Beis Hamikdash, and therefore, and every Jew, everyone contributed equally to the Mishkan, and so everyone is a part of it, and so it's a way to really kind of own it in a way and be connected individually to the Mishkan and the Beis Hamikdash, especially the Beis Hamikdash with the Hanukkah story, of course. So I'm just wondering whether there is that element to it.
Yeah, I think that that is an important element. That's very important. It only gets us halfway home because some not insignificant proportion of the mitzvahs that the Rambam discusses are temple related, and we don't find this language in any of those areas. I'll just say parenthetically, part of what made the Rambam so revolutionary, and part of what made the Rambam, basically to this day unmatched and unparalleled, is he was the first and almost the only person to write a code that is functional for both temple and non-temple times, right? You pick up the Shulchan Aruch, it's the code of Jewish law. It's the halacha for every aspect of Judaism, except it has not one mention of the Beis Hamikdash or the halachos for Kohanim or Korbanos, because it was written in the 16th century for Jews living in a non-temple world. The Rambam, right, took it as one of his articles of faith that Mashiach could come today, the temple will be rebuilt, and we got to be ready to go. So the Rambam is constantly toggling back and forth between the halachos of a temple world and a non-temple world. So he has everything, right? You want to know about the halachos of the Beis Hamikdash and the halachos of Korbanos and the halachos of Tuma for Kohanim, and it's all in there. Right? Nobody did that, right? That was stunning in the lifetime of the Rambam and in every generation since. So just my long-winded way of saying, while there may be something unique about the significance of the Beis Hamikdash in Halachos Hanukkah, there's lots of opportunities for the Rambam to talk about the Beis Hamikdash, and we don't find this language in any of those other locations.
Yeah, but that's not revolutionary in the sense that preceded the Shulchan Aruch by over 300 years. If anything, it was the Shulchan Aruch or the Torah basically that came along and said, we're going to get rid of everything that's not current.
Yeah, well, it happened much before that. Meaning the Rif was also a code, and the Rif didn't include anything that was not contemporary. So yes, I mean it's part of a larger phenomenon. Okay.
By the way, Rabbi, I toggled back on and asked Dr. Google, and apparently the Karaites did not recognize Hanukkah as a holiday.
But they wouldn't have recognized Purim either.
No, they recognized Purim in Tanakh because of Megillas Esther.
Yeah, and hang on to that. That's going to be an important distinction, and hopefully we'll have time to talk about that in a minute. But yeah, that's a great point. Right, anything that's post-biblical, right? The Karaites presumably are not going to be goris. Just very briefly, I want to go back to the source. The Gemara famously asks, and this is source number 2. The Gemara famously asks, my Hanukkah, and it's difficult to translate that question, but what's the basis for Hanukkah? So the Gemara in source number 2, this is the famous Gemara in the 2nd chapter of Shabbos. Zetana Rabbanan b'chafei b'kislev yomi de Hanukkah tam ne'inu. 25th of Kislev, 8 days, Hanukkah. D'lo l'mispei behon, d'lo lis anas behon. These are the halachos of those 8 days. What makes them special is there's no eulogies and there's no fasts. K'shenichnesu Yevanim laheichal timos chol hashmanim shebeheichal. When those Yevanim broke into the temple, they made impure all of the oil. When the Hasmoneans defeated them, just have in the back of your mind the way the Rambam told the story. It's so different, right? There's no mention of this, by the way. So they searched, and all they could find was one cruse of oil with the stamp of the Kohen Gadol, right? That didn't make it in. That detail's not in there. It could only last for 1 day. It lasted for 8 days. The next year, they decided to establish a holiday for Hallel and Hodah. Just want to focus on those last words for a moment. Okay, and just notice, right, just amplifies the extent to which the Rambam was going out on a limb here, right? All of the details that you saw in the first halacha that are just totally absent, right? This is the be-all and end-all of the description of the history of Hanukkah in the Gemara. The Rambam added everything. So what do those words mean? The year after Hanukkah, the year after that great miracle, the following year, they decided, right, the rabbis decided to make it a holiday, annual holiday, and they're going to make them Yamim Tovim B'Halal Behuda. What is that? Yamim Tovim B'Halal Behuda. So we get the idea, right? Holidays of, joy and Thanksgiving, something like that. So, but specifically, what does that mean? Tachlis, what are we going to do on those days? So Rashi says on the spot, by the way, right, Rashi says the Gemara uses the word Yamim Tovim. Yom Tov has a very specific connotation. Yom Tov normally means, right, when we think of Yantif, right, Yom Tov is Pesach, Sukkot, Shavuos, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. So Yom Tov means, 39 Halachos, right, minus 2 that you need for Ochel Nefesh. But Isser Malacha. So the Rashi says, no. There's not going to be an Isser Malacha on Hanukkah. That's not what we're talking about, right? So what are we talking about? Lo shasurim b'malacha shelo nikvu elo likros halal velomer al hanisim behoda. He says, first of all, you should know that Yantif, just don't take it literally. It's not what it means. And so what is halal and hoda? You're not going to take those literally either. He says, no. Halal means halal, and hoda means al hanisim. That's the main character of Hanukkah, right? If you stopped Rashi on the street and said, oh, just tell me, Hanukkah, what's that about? How do you fulfill Hanukkah? Halal al hanisim. Halal and al hanisim. The Rambam has a very different interpretation of Halachos Hanukkah and a very different interpretation of that Gemara which we just saw. Right? If you go back to the halachos that we just looked at, okay, and flip back for a second to Perek Gimel, halacha Gimel, right? Perek Gimel, halacha Gimel, and let's reread it with in the light of the Gemara that we just saw. ומפני זה הסכינו חכמים שבאוסו הדור שיהיו 18 הימים האלו שתחילתן מליל ל-15 בכסלו ימי שמחה והלל ומדליקין בהן הנרות בערב על פסחי הבתים בכל לילה ולילה מ-18 לילות. See what the Rambam did? The Rambam changed everything. He said very specifically, right? He doesn't use the word Yom Tov. Instead of Yom Tov, he uses the word Yemei Simcha. So it's not a Yom Tov anymore. They're days of joy. V'halel umadlikin b'hananerus be'erev al pischei abatim. This is Rav Rosenzweig's Chiddush. He says the following. He says, the Gemara said, go back to the Gemara. What was the exact formulation? Yamim tovim b'halal v'hodah. So there's 3 components, Yamim Tovim, Halal, and Hodah. Yamim Tovim, Rambam says, means Simcha, the days of joy. Halal means Halal. And what does Hodah mean? How do you express Hodah, thanksgiving, on Halal? Rashi says Al Hanisim. You don't find, Al Hanisim doesn't appear in the Rambam. Maybe, right, I think he said it, but it wasn't part of this treatment. How do you accomplish what the Gemara says to make Hanukkah a time of Hoda'ah? Keep reading the Rambam. Umadlikin b'hen hanerus be'erev al pischei habatim. Lighting the candles is the expression of thanksgiving. Lighting the candles is itself the expression of thanksgiving. And they're a unit. Halal and Hodah means Halal and Hadlakas Ner Hanukkah. That's how you accomplish what the Gemara says, to turn the days of Hanukkah into days of Halal and Hodah. How do you do that? You say Halal and you light Hanukkah candles. Hanukkah candles is the expression. Right? Sometimes we express our thanks in words, and sometimes we express them in actions. Okay. Go back to Perek Dalet Halacha Yud Beis. I'm going to reread it in the light of this, okay? And you'll see it's a totally different halacha. Mitzvahs ner Hanukkah, mitzvah chaviva hi ad me'od. It's still a jarring expression. We'll come back to it in a minute. But I played a little trick before because we lost sight of what happened at the beginning of Halacha Yud Beis. Mitzvahs ner Hanukkah, and I'm just going to read the middle quickly. Mitzvahs ner Hanukkah, mitzvah chaviva ad me'od, v'tzachatam li zarba, k'dei li gemaz ba. Ulahosif b'shevach hakel v'hodaya lo al hanisim she'asa. The mitzvah, he says it, it's explicit, right? It's a stunning line, but it's so easy to miss because there's this even more stunning line in the middle. But just consider it an ellipses, it'll be easier to say. Mitzvahs ner Hanukkah, lahosif b'shevach hakel v'hodaya lo. What is the function? What is the purpose of lighting Hanukkah candles? It is to add shevach and hodah to Hashem. It couldn't be more explicit, right? It's a stunning line. You don't find this anywhere else in the Rambam. You don't find this anywhere else in the Halacha. Generally speaking, if you want to give praise, so the only way to do it is with words. The Rambam says on Hanukkah, we have a different formulation. There are two themes to Hanukkah. They're married to each other, and in Congress, they complement each other, and they produce something that you can't have in the absence of either one. Hallel and Hoda'ah, which means, practically speaking, Hallel and Hadlakas Ner Hanukkah. Let's back up for a moment, recognizing this, to go back and try to answer some of the questions that we raised. Okay. So the first question we had was the story. Why does the Rambam begin with the story? So a couple of you already raised this point, which is the fundamental distinction between the two rabbinic holidays that we're talking about, Hanukkah and Purim. The fundamental distinction is that Purim is in Tanakh. We have a Megillah. We're going to read the Megillah on the holiday. You don't need to tell me the story in the Mishnah Torah because I'm going to hear the story when I go to shul and hear the Megillah. I'm going to hear it at night. I'm going to hear it again during the day. I'm going to hear it twice. Right? We have a text that tells us the story of Purim. When it comes to Hanukkah, we don't have this text, so we don't have the story. How can you express Shabach and Hodah to Hashem without some understanding and some acknowledgement of what it is that we're being so thankful for? Oh, we're lighting candles. What are we celebrating? Tell me the story. I don't have it. It's not in Tanakh. The Rambam says, I'm going to fill it in for you, and I'm going to create the fullest possible picture that transcends the picture you would get from just reading the Talmud itself. When the Rambam tells us Hilchos Hallel in the middle of Hanukkah, it's not an interruption, right? It's not somehow disconnected. It's not misplaced. It's all part of the same thing. Hallel and candle lighting are one unit that together constitute what the Talmud instructed us, namely the Hodah, the Thanksgiving component of the holiday of Hanukkah. How are you able to interrupt after the bracha that you said Asher Gesham Tzivanu L'Hadlik Ner Shel Hanukkah, and then you interrupt with Shas Anisim and Al Haner Salalu, and you start saying, no, it's not an interruption because they're all part of the same unit. They're all part of the same theme, right? The candles sing, the candles speak out, the candles display, the candles illuminate all the themes and all the notions of Thanksgiving that we're trying to convey. So saying the bracha of Shas Anisim Lavusin, you just put to words what the candles are doing. That's not an interruption. That's not a hefsek. It goes hand in hand with the mitzvah that you are performing. And now we're in a position to answer our final two questions, and with this we'll wrap up, and then I'm happy to stay on and take any final questions. The Birkas HaRoeh, the guy on the street who's not going to light, he's passing by in a boat, and he sees my candles, and he could say the bracha of Sh'asa Nisim Lavosenu. So Rav Soloveitchik gives an answer which doesn't fit with this theme I'll just mention, which is very beautiful on its own. The Rambam says fundamentally Hanukkah is all about the transmission of the Masorah. You need to know what happened in the past, and I need to convey it to someone else so that they could convey it, to the next generation. So the Rav Soloveitchik says, if you're playing a part in the transmission of that Masorah, so you could make a bracha, right? It takes two to tango. So I lit the candles, you saw the candles. So I could say the bracha because I lit them. But as the seer, right, you're playing an indispensable role yourself. So of course you can't say the bracha of Ashir because you didn't like them, but you could say the bracha on seeing them because you did see them. And the fact that you're a participant in the transmission of the Masorah, that makes you part and parcel of the mitzvah. So of course you can say the bracha. That's Rav Soloveitchik's interpretation. I'll just say perhaps, right, conceivably, if you wanted to understand this bracha in the context of this larger argument, maybe you could say that the mitzvah is so fundamental that we lower the bar. And even if someone can't participate fully, we allow them to participate to whatever extent they can. If seeing the candle can serve as a pretext for someone to give praise to Hashem, well, beautiful. So, right, the whole idea, as the Gemara said, the whole idea is halal, right? Halal and hodah. So if we have an opportunity, if there's a pretext for someone to say hodah, that's great, right? That's amazing. We're not going to stop someone from participating in the mitzvah of hodah. If there's any opportunity, let them seize it and let them participate in that mitzvah. The last question, and this is maybe the hardest one, but sell the shirt, right? The guy's broke. You telling him he has to go knocking on doors to get the candles to perform this mitzvah? We wouldn't say that about matzah. We wouldn't say that about shofar. Why do we say it about this mitzvah? So there's a couple answers to this question. The Maggid Mishnah, as Penina mentioned earlier, says this fundamentally different mitzvah. What's special about Hanukkah? Pirsumei nisa. You don't really have that with any other mitzvah. The one other mitzvah you might have it with is arba kosos, the four cups of wine at the seder. It doesn't seem like that's what the Rambam is talking about, but conceptually that is an approach, and that's the Maggid Mishnah's approach. Right? Another approach is to say that it's no worse than Kiddush. There's some mitzvos which are so special that right, this is not unprecedented. I have for you the very last source on the source sheet. Beautiful Gemara in Megillah. They go. The students ask their rabbis, right, why do you merit long life? And this one has this answer. Another one has this answer. These were the special qualities that I live by, and you should live by them, and you'll have a long life too. Shalu Tamida bes Rabbi Zakkai. They once asked Rabbi Zakkai, "B'mei arachta yami, why'd you have such a long life?" Amalim said, "A secret to long life. You know what it is? Miyamai lo hishtanti mayim b'soch arba amos shel tefillah, v'lo kinisi shel chaverai, v'lo bitalti kiddush hayom." Three things, right? I never mistreated davening, and I never called anyone by a nickname, and I never missed kiddush on Shabbos. Ima zekena haisali, I had an elderly mother. Pam achas machra kipa sheberosha ve'avia lekiddush hayom. She once, we were so destitute, she once sold her head covering so that I could have kiddush. I could have kiddush during the day. You think it's unprecedented? No, it's not unprecedented. Here's a precedent. Except the Rambam doesn't paskin this way. When it comes to Rambam, when it comes to kiddush in the halachos of the Rambam, he doesn't say this. Right? There's no other halacha that you'll find this for. When it comes to the Rambam, right? This is sui generis. So what's the basis, right? The Rambam can't just make this up out of whole cloth. What's the basis for this halacha? So as Rav Rosenzweig said, he said the Rambam didn't need a makor for this. He didn't need a source for it. what the Rambam established in Hilchos Hanukkah is itself the justification for this halacha. And it just accentuates everything that he's just tried to argue, which is that the mitzvahs of, right, go back to halacha yud beis, right, the chavivin admo, the mitzvah of Hanukkah has to be so precious and so dear, right? This is the formulation ad absurdum that tells you just how precious and just how seriously we have to take this this mitzvah. This isn't just any mitzvah. What's required is to treat it as an opportunity, and the Rambam says don't squander the opportunity. Halal and Hodah are so intrinsic and so important, everyone needs to do them, even the pauper. It's not just a normal mitzvah saseh, maybe for Pirsumei Nisa, we'd spend a little more. That's not the idea. What the Rambam is telling you is that these themes are so important that you have to do almost anything to fulfill this mitzvah. There is an exception. If you continue in the Rambam, he says shalom, right? The mitzvah of shalom will supersede it. But short of that, you have to do almost anything you can to fulfill these mitzvahs of Shevach and Hodah on Hanukkah. Right? What Rav Rosenzweig argues here is that the miracle of Hanukkah is that we were permitted, right? Go back to the beginning of the story, right? Let me say it like this: the medium is the message. It wasn't just that we were able to go back to the temple and restore the menorah. And let's have a holiday because we restored the menorah. Everything was hanging in the balance, right? They were trying to acculturate us. They were trying to stop us, right? Go back to the formulations in that the earliest lines in the Rambam. Right? What does he say? V'lo hinichu sam lasok b'torah mitzvos. Bitlu datam, they were attempting to eradicate our performance of mitzvos, our involvement in Torah. They were trying to eradicate Judaism. The fact that we were able to light those candles was just symbolic of the fact that we were now able to perform other mitzvos. All the things that they tried, bitlu datam, v'lo hinichu sam lasok b'torah mitzvos. Now we can do those things. And that requires a moment of acknowledgement. That requires our performance of this mitzvah, Hallel and Hodah, Hallel together with the performance of Hadlakas Neiros to communicate just what it is that we walk away with from this holiday, namely the capacity to perform the mitzvos, to serve Hashem, and to say thank you to Hashem for the opportunity to do exactly this. Hopefully, we created less trouble than we made. Some of these questions are quite provocative, but I hope that this argument at least be food for thought and hopefully food for discussion over the coming snowy days as we say goodbye to Hanukkah in these last couple of days. So I'm going to stay on, and I'm happy to answer any questions or field any comments.
Rabbi?